Well, let's stick with this subject of climate change. This headline in The Times: hundreds of celebrities rail against injustice of Just Stop Oil sentences. Again, you saw some of the images in the headlines. Just Stop Oil activists were given 4- and 5-year sentences over a 2022 stunt that brought M25 motorway to a standstill. 1,200 artists, athletes and academics have condemned the injustice, they call it, of the sentences that have been handed out. They've written to the Attorney General calling for an urgent meeting to discuss the jailing of truth-tellers and their silencing in court. Let's talk to Dr. Bing Jones, who is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. Welcome to Politics Live. Why is this sentence, these 4- and 5-year sentences, why are they too draconian?
Look, these are sinister, new authoritarian laws that will enable any judge to silence pretty much any challenge to any government. Look, it's terrifyingly hot. Sunday was the hottest day that the world has ever seen, probably the hottest day for 100,000 years. And then Monday was even hotter still. This court was a really good example of the amazing paradox, the way that we're able to talk about these things and fail to act. The court agreed. In a court you have agreed facts, and the judge and the prosecution and the CPS agreed on these words, which are that we're on the verge of catastrophic, irreversible harm caused by fossil fuels.
Right.
And the judge called this irrelevant, just political opinion, just belief. He forbade the defendants to talk about the climate. He refused to have a specialist climate
No, we've
person
heard. But can I just ask you, are you saying that these people shouldn't have been arrested at all for what they did in terms of bringing that part of the motorway to a standstill, perhaps endangering people waiting to go to hospital appointments? I don't know. But are you saying they shouldn't have been arrested, that they shouldn't have been given that length of sentence? Or are you saying that actually they should just be allowed to protest and disrupt other people's lives without any legal redress?
What I'm saying is that it is profoundly wrong to lock up people who are for really lengthy jail sentences. These are far longer than sexual offenders get quite often. Locking up ordinary people who are trying to avoid a disaster whilst allowing the people who are making that disaster, that's the fossil fuel industry, to go on making profits. That's profoundly, profoundly wrong.
All right.
And it's a cruel law.
All right.
And it's inhumanly applied.
No, let me hold you there, because please stay with us for the rest of the discussion. Jenny, what do you say to Dr. Bing Jones? Disproportionate.
I think you know what I'm going to say is that this was a matter for the courts and they made that decision. We do respect people's right to process, of course we do, but there's always a balance with other people's rights to be able to conduct their lives safely. And this was a decision that the courts took. It's not something that I'm going to make a significant comment on. Right.
Well, except, Jenny, you were one of those in the Lords who tried to disrupt the passage of the bill under which these protesters were convicted and sentenced, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, voting for amendments to the bill. You have sympathy, rightly or wrongly, with Dr. Bing Jones.
We had concerns about the bill, you're quite right. We spoke out at the time.
You voted against parts of it.
We voted against, absolutely. But you cannot have a situation where the courts have made their judgment. That bill was passed by Parliament. The courts now have a responsibility to implement that new law, and they made their judgment. I'm not going to sit here and make any further comment about what the courts have done.
Except, Jenny, now, are you saying because you're in government, you no longer have those concerns?
I think because you're in government, you have to respect the decisions of the court, and that's very important.
Should the law be repealed, those bits that you were unhappy with?
I'm not going to say anything more about it today, Joe, but I do respect the decisions of the court. I think it's very important that governments do that. Unlike some of the decisions that we've seen from previous governments, we do things differently. If that law, if that law needed to be changed, that would have to be done through the proper way. It's not done by ministers sitting on TV and making proclamations about it.
Well, what do you make of that, Dr. Bing Jones?
Again, we're avoiding the issue. Look, Cressy Gethin, who's a 20-year-old Cambridge University student, is sitting rotting in a jail It is absolutely blindingly obvious that there's something tragically wrong here, and it needs to be put right. And the biggest thing that's wrong is that the media and the government are more or less bought up by the fossil fuel industry through lobbying, through funding of political parties and think tanks. We're in deep trouble. The media is half owned by fossil fuel interests, and fossil fuel is going up. Every single major fossil fuel producer is planning to increase their output. We need a binding international treaty. This is the only way forward. We need a binding international treaty to stop all oil, coal and gas by 2030.
All right, Dr. Bing-Jones, let me just pick up on one of the things that you said there, and that is about the amount of fossil fuel being emitted into the atmosphere is going up because there are more oil and gas licences, something you probably support, Harriet. I mean, he's got a point, hasn't he, Jenny?
He has every right to go on TV, make that case that he's just made. He has every right to stand outside Parliament and make that case, to come into Parliament and lobby. That is how he should be making his case. He's done a very, very effective job of it. What I think people have a problem with is when motorways are blocked, and I think people see that in a very different light. But the substance of what he's arguing, he has absolutely a responsibility to make that case if that's what he believes.
Ella?
I think when it comes to the police crime courts and sentencing bill, I'd like to see that repealed. I think there's been a horrendous crackdown on political protest and freedom to protest in the last few years, and it's a real problem. You know, you're now beholden to prove to police officers that you're not being too noisy in order to protest freely. And I feel quite nervous and uncomfortable about the length of the sentences. But when it comes to the group Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, and their politics, I mean, the arrogance from the speaker, Dr. Jones, is remarkable. You know, unbelievable that a Cambridge student has been locked up. God forbid she would just be a plaster or someone normal. You know, the fact is there are scientific facts of which we can agree on and listen to experts with respect on, whether it's in relation to the environment or anything else. And then the next step is what you do, what the political decisions you make about a crisis or about an issue. And Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion are fundamentally undemocratic. They don't think there should be any public participation in this process. They're extremely authoritarian. I mean, they have no interest in engaging with, you know, any kind of member of the public. They've been stopping them on the streets.
We may just make an example of that. Right, go on, Dr. Bing-Jones. You engage with Ella on this.
That is complete rubbish. The government and the media are failing. You're failing in the three basic rules. Look, I'm a doctor. I spent my life looking after some of the sickest patients in the hospital. Two things I've learned. Number one, when things are bad, you go and get something done about it. You don't wait until you come back from your holidays. You don't wait until you've got a pay rise, which is what Rachel Reeves is doing. And when you're told it's horrid, the treatment, that your hair's going to drop out and you're going to be sick for months, you take the advice because it's better than being dead.
But Dr.
We've
Jones,
failed for 30 years. The government has failed.
Let Ella come back.
I just want to know, I mean, Dr. Jones, that, you know, you make a convincing argument, but the kind of changes to, we were just having a discussion about what behavioural change might be, the kind of changes to people's lives, that the policies that Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion, any of these climate activists are advocating for, the kind of, you know, punitive restriction on people's freedoms and resources will make people, in some cases, destitute, will make a living in this country an absolute misery. I don't see any answers to that argument from you guys.
This is breathtakingly ecologically illiterate. The real disruption is from the climate. It's fossil fuels.
You're just a fanatic.
I'm not a fanatic. I'm just telling you what billions of measurements by scientists are telling us. We have got to come to terms with the fact that we're in a fossil-fueled furnace.
Okay. Have you ever had a conversation with, you know, a normal working-class family who struggles to make the bills at the best of times, and talked to them and heard what they think about the kind of measures you're putting out, or is it just that you guys, doctors and professors, only hang out with each other on these kind of protests?
I seem to mostly talk to people like yourself who are just spouting the Daily Mail speak, which is to make a complex system, make a complex issue.
I think you're making the argument for me, Dr. Jones.
Simple one. You're making complex issues into something simple so that you can blame somebody else.
Yeah. All right.
The ordinary
Working class
politics
people's lives
isn't-
are just simple. I mean, yeah, we're
Ordinary politics.
Well, hang on,
Message
Dr. Jones,
clear.
I'm just going to stop you for a moment because I want to bring in the two other guests, but we will get another response from you. Whose side are you on here, Max, having heard both Ella and Dr. Jones?
Well, instinctively, I want to deal with the climate crisis. So instinctively, what Dr. Jones says about dealing with the climate crisis and doing it as quickly as we can, I agree with that. However, my real concern about these protests is that it loses the public's trust and it does not bring people along with us. In terms of the sentencing, Jenny is entirely right. It's not good for members of Parliament to sit here and have a go at judges. We've had too many years where Conservative governments and Conservative ministers in particular have been having a go at judges. That isn't the role for politicians. Politicians set the legislation. Of course, the Lib Dems did vote against the legislation that allowed these long sentences, and I think they're draconian. It makes me profoundly uncomfortable. However, when we see these kind of protests that are hugely disruptive, it doesn't do the movement very much good.
Harriet, do you agree, or would you like to say something about the law and the length of the sentence?
I think the actions of Just Stop Oil, whether it's specific cases or sort of across the board, is very much in the scheme of we are right, the rest of the public are wrong or just don't understand or just don't want to be brought along. We understand the climate issue.
But do you? That's what Dr.
We
Jones is saying.
absolutely
Not
understand.
enough.
We also understand that the UK is responsible for about 1% of carbon emissions. Therefore, why are we putting our businesses, our livelihoods, our jobs at risk, under peril, making life harder here in order to prove a point, in order to sort of either keep on the right side of Just Stop Oil or to bring others sort of along? From my point of view, and I actually Joe, just want to pick you up on something. You said I'd support new licences. I support licences in the North Sea. I support licences from our basin here when we are still using oil and gas in the UK. I want it to be from our own domestic supply. In terms of the sentences that were passed down, the law was broken. The people were disrupted and there was a sentence for that, and that is now being served.
Dr. Jones, there's one thing that was brought up by our Liberal Democrat MP on the panel, Max Wilkinson, and that's about bringing people along with you. Do you think you are persuading people or alienating them with your approach?
There's ample, thank you, good question. There's ample evidence to say that people are not alienated by disruptive action. Quite the contrary, they're more likely to act, they're more likely to move along the spectrum. And look, we shouldn't need JSO, Just Stop Oil, but disruption does work. There was a march of 100,000 people on the Restore Nature March recently, which got almost no coverage at all, and 2 people threw a bit of custard powder on Stonehenge, and we got 100 million views on Twitter in 3 days.
Yes.
And people say disruption is bad, but disruption does bring dialogue in. I'm
All
here.
right.
I'm talking
Yes,
about the
you
climate, and I'm talking about the fact that if you talk about electric cars and increasing renewables, that is just not enough.
All right.
The key is to reduce the burning of fossil fuels.
All right.
We've got a blanket of carbon dioxide heating us up, letting the sun
All
in,
right.
not letting it out. We're in deep, deep trouble.
Dr. Jones, thank you very much for joining our discussion today. One of the points that's actually raised in the letter to which 1,200 academics and celebrities put their signatures to was that actually with the current prisons crisis that you have heard a lot about on Politics Live, should we be sending environmental protesters to jail when the prisons are almost full? Well, I don't know if they're still going on, but they're still debating. We can see there in the House of Commons, that's MPs, whether to reduce sentences for certain people. They're called standard determinant sentences. Those will be released after serving 40% of their sentences rather than half. Oh, you can see Priti Patel there, the former Home Secretary, standing up. Is it right, Jenny, I presume you are totally signed up to this idea of standard determinant sentences, people serving only 40%?
I do not like this at all. Of course I don't. I don't think anybody feels comfortable about this in any way. But you've got to deal with the situation you are presented with as a new government. And we saw, when prisons get overfull, they get very dangerous. And the prison where I used to work, Frankland, near Durham, a prison officer just in the last few days was hospitalised because of a violent incident. You also then lose the ability to take people into prison. You end up with prisoners in police cells. You then have police unable to go out and combat crime. The whole system fails. The criminal justice system was on the brink of failure. We had to do this. We don't like it. It's not the situation we'd want to be in, but you have to deal with what's in front of you sometimes.
Harriet, are you signed up to it?
I think sort of we need to look at how we've got here. So over the past...
Yes,
yes, and I will absolutely. So we, the Conservatives, are the party of law and order. We have been delivering tougher sentences.
Can you still claim that?
We have been delivering tougher sentences, and because of that, more people are behind bars. We've also delivered 13,000 new prison places in the last few years, and we've also got 2 new prisons, a prison under construction and 2 in
Harriet,
planning.
that flies into the face that the prisons are almost full, and these are the things that are being discussed by MPs as we sit here today. Yes, Max, do.
There is an issue here that about 20% of those who are in jail are on remand, and there's huge backlogs in the court because the Conservatives defunded the justice system in my own constituency, which until early this month was represented by the Justice Secretary, who, by the way, has spoken out eloquently about the prisons crisis. In my own constituency, in December last year, we had a backlog of about 2,000 cases waiting at the Magistrates' Court. That tells the story. Now, we do need to really get to grips with this. We need to deal with reoffending, the only way we can do that is by having a prison system that works, that focuses on rehabilitation as well as punishment.
All right, respond briefly, and then I'll come to you.
Well, I mean, I was actually going to go back to the original point on the 40% of the sentences. I think what our position is on that is 40% has been chosen. Why is it 40%, for example? Why not 45? And also, what's the time horizon for this? Is this something that's going to be there for a few months? Is it going to be there for a few years? We know that Labour voted against sort of things in the last Parliament.
Well, the answer that is an interesting question.
It will be there for a short...
In the final bit of the last Parliament, we had this situation. Sorry for interrupting.
Well,
we had this situation where, as my predecessor as Cheltenham's MP said, basically the government was refusing to deal with the problem.
Exactly.
You just kicked the can down the road.
But on the question of how long it's going to be in place for and why 40%?
As short as a time as possible.
But that's not
but as long as necessary. We were on the verge of the whole criminal justice system seizing up, so we were no longer able to convict people. We were no longer able to sentence them. We cannot have that. Since 2010, the criminal justice system has been completely wrecked, from courts to policing to prisons to probation.
This is the narrative we are hearing a lot.
Every single piece of the criminal justice system has been undermined.
And you're going to fix it with no more money because it's an unprotected department, Justice Department, Jenny, and there's no more money.
I used to work at Frankland Prison, and when I worked there, it was, by today's standards, incredibly safe and stable and a secure place to work. Now, we see officers
But you admit you're not going to be investing or putting any more money in?
Look, we've got what we've got to spend, and Rachel Reeves has been very clear about that. But you've got a system the system has got to where it has because of a lack of planning, a lack of strategy, and a lack of joined-up thinking. That's ended now, and we are going to be working with the agencies involved, and we will make this system safer, not just for the people working in it, but for people on the streets who feel they're getting a very bad service at the moment.
A strategy, therefore, how long is this going to be in place for?
Harriet, with the best will in the world, you lot have had 14 years undermining and trashing this system. You will have to forgive me.
If you make a decision in the first couple of weeks, you must have thought about it.
Well, if this hang on,
Harriet, very quickly, Jo, you're rowing over an emergency measure, which may be fair enough. You know, we have to do something about the prisons. What I want to see is some more detail on what actually is the ideology behind in prisons. Is it about rehabilitation? Is it about punishment? Wow. You can't be superficial about just saying we are about law and order.
Correct.
When in actual, but what are your plans to change?
Well, and that is a discussion for another day. But as you say, it's a bigger discussion. No, we're going to move on because we're going to talk about.
And you will see that from us, unlike what you saw from the last government.
Let's talk about the Tory leadership contest because we have had some news this morning. Yesterday, you'll remember James Cleverly, the former Home and Foreign Secretary, threw his hat into the ring. Well, the Shadow Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, has entered the contest. There he is to be the next Tory leader.